Good morning, everyone. This is Doug. This will be an episode that's going to talk about what actually appears to be a fragment of the original gospel to the Hebrews by Matthew. And it was mislabeled or mistitled, I believe, Gospel of Peter. It's a small fragment, so they guessed it was from the Gospel of Peter, but that's not where it comes from. I do not believe, as you'll see. And this fragment shows that it was Herod Antipas, also known as Herod the Tetrarch, meaning one of the four rulers, but he was the only one actually given this title typically. So Herod Antipas is the one who, in this context, orders Pilate to kill Jesus. It's not left up to inference or surmise, but which is reasonable anyway, because he sends him back with a crown of thorns in the actual gospels that we have. This is the gospel we are not seeing anymore, but was circulating clearly in the church. The Bishop of Constantinople listed it, had 2,200 lines in it, the Gospel to the Hebrews, as it was called in the Stacconomy in about 834 AD. So it's still around into the 800s. It's even quoted in Muslim literature at that time. So where is it? Why was it destroyed? Because obviously it was done deliberately. It was a precious gem. People didn't like something in it. And I'm going to suggest it was maybe this kind of passage, which was anti-Herodian, because this puts the blame not on the Jews for killing Jesus, but on Herod Antipas. So let me just do this intro here. So I was reading Livius.org and I found this quote down here. I'm going to read to you in a second. And let me give you an intro to what it says. And the topic here is, did a childhood friend of Paul, that is Herod Antipas, order Jesus' death? Was this friend the source of Paul's killing authority? That's the authority to kill Stephen and others he said he'd killed and caused others to blaspheme and all that. Where was he getting his authority that was to kill people? We'll get into that, because in John 18, the Sanhedrin says, we don't have authority to kill anyone. That's, we have to ask Roman authority to give it to us. And they didn't, that's why Pilate was addressed and asked him, you've got to do it because we have no legal right to do it. Anyway, so let's read my intro here. Herod Antipas, also known as Herod the Tetrarch, sends Jesus back to Pontius Pilate. We're all familiar with this, with a mock crown of thorns and blood dripping on a mock royal robe. In the Gospel of Peter, this is what it's called. Again, I think it's just an incorrect label, but anyway, Peter alludes to orders by this Herod Antipas, that were to kill Jesus before the fact. So this was before Jesus killed. He sends an order out to have him killed. So this is the man who gives the order, and he is called the king in this small snippet that survives in history. This is what the Livius text categorized, this snippet, this passage. It's not a snippet, I should say. It's actually several paragraphs. But it's a small portion that I'm focusing on within those several paragraphs. The Gospel of Peter, again, not what it was actually called, just what somebody named it, is part of a small book that was discovered in the Egyptian desert by French archaeologists in 1886 or 1887. The book was written at the end of the 6th century, but the text itself dates back to the second half of the 2nd century. Okay, so let's take a look. Okay, now let me read to you the Wikipedia article on Gospel of Peter, just so we get a broad brush perspective. The Gospel of Peter was recovered in 1886 by the French archaeologist Urbain Barral in the modern Egyptian city of Akim, 60 miles north of Nag Hammadi. The 8th or 9th century manuscript had been respectfully buried with an Egyptian monk. So this is something that he wanted to be buried with. It was meant to be a positive thing, so he thought it was important, right? The fragmentary Gospel of Peter, as it's been dubbed, was the first non-canonical gospel to have been rediscovered. Non-canonical doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means it wasn't accepted by the Roman Catholic Church in 1547 when they made their first canon decision. According to them, that's when the first canon was ever decided. Was the first non-canonical gospel to have been rediscovered, preserved in the dry sand of Egypt. Publication delayed by Buriant until 1892, occasioned intense interest. From the Passion sequence that is preserved, it is clear that the gospel was a narrative gospel, but whether a complete narrative similar to the canonical gospels or simply a passion cannot be said. Okay, so I decided to start my research in the Christian arena with the Anti-Nicene Fathers series. And in volume 9, 1912, at page 4, we see a summary by Harnack. He's a German scholar, and he summarizes this work that was discovered in the desert in the 1890s Herod was the judge who condemned Jesus. Do you see that, my friends? And to him, application had to be made for the body. So that means Jesus wasn't ordered killed by Pilate. He was ordered killed by Herod Antipas, as we'll see. So this is a big deal. And why it would be discarded from history is exactly because it does say Herod, the appointee of the Roman Empire. He's the guy who killed them, not the Jews. So the goal of the Roman authorities was to make sure that they wouldn't be blamed. It wouldn't be on Herod's shoulders thinking he's a king and he's going to kill a rival king. No, we're going to make it all look like the Jews were the sole factor in why this happened. Now, let me read you the actual verse as it came down to us. This is also right there in Anti-Nicene Fathers 9 at page 7. Verse 1, but of the Jews none washed his hands, neither Herod nor any of his judges. And when they had refused to wash them, Pilate rose up, and then Herod the king commanded that the Lord, that's Jesus, be taken, saying to them, whatsoever things ever you do, I commanded you to do, unto him do. So now he's giving the orders to Pilate. So that's important. All right, so next, the second verse of the total of 15 verses in this fragmentary text says this, and there was standing there Joseph, the friend of Pilate and of Jesus. So Joseph of Arimathea was both a friend of Pilate and a friend of Jesus. And knowing that they were about to crucify him, he came to Pilate, that's Joseph, and asked the body of the Lord, that means Jesus, for burial. And Pilate sent to Herod and asked his body. Why would he have to do that? Because that's the guy in control of the proceedings, in fact. And Herod said, brother Pilate, even if no one had asked for him, we purpose to bury him, especially as the Sabbath draws on. For it is written in the law that the sun set not upon one that has been put to death. All right, so now let's go back to the slide before and where Harnack is giving his summary, what he is inferring from these two verses. Herod was the judge who condemned Jesus, not Pilate, and to him application had to be made for the body. So whoever was the judicial officer, the real judicial officer, was the one who you had to ask for the body. And that's why Pilate couldn't make a decision about the body. Pilate asked Herod Antipas, Herod the Tetrarch. So this is key. Very important little detail that you wouldn't have known if you didn't get this little insight. And you can now see why Rome would make sure this particular passage or this work, perhaps really it's from the Gospel to the Hebrews by Matthew, had to be destroyed, particularly even as late as the 800s, because the Roman Empire doesn't want to be blamed. They want to blame the Jews for everything, right? So if they're the ones ordering it out of the jealousy that Jesus claimed to be a king and Herod the Tetrarch claims to be king. And I hope you notice they call him Herod the King. So Herod the Tetrarch did believe he was a king. So there were four kings, actually, technically. There was his other two brothers and one grandson of Herod the Great, his grandfather, that were the other three rulers, but of other regions, and they were not as significant. He was a very key player in this time period. So Herod Antipas, Herod, also known as Herod the Tetrarch, is the king. And he's the king making this decision. He's the king you have to ask for the body because he's the one who ruled his death. And so when Jesus is sent back to him by Pilate, says, I don't want to make this decision. He gives it over to Herod Antipas, Herod the Tetrarch. And the body, Jesus, comes back to him with the message, implicit from the crown of thorns bleeding on Jesus' head and the robe, dripped upon with blood, that he was supposed to kill him. And that was just something you could easily infer. But now when you read this, it's more than just an inference. It's something that's actually going on. And that's why the fact you have to ask for the body from Herod means Herod had given the order to kill Jesus, and that's the person who then you would apply to have the body. And that explains why Harnack, in his summary of the passage down here, says Herod was the judge who condemned Jesus, and to him application had to be made for the body. So he's inferring from the fact that there was an application that had to be made to Herod Antipas, aka Herod the Tetrarch, meant that because somebody was asking for the body of Jesus, it had to come from the ruler who had made the decision in the order of death in the first place, and that was Herod Antipas, Herod the Tetrarch. Now, to give you a complete picture how this ends, this excerpt ends, it says, but I, Simon Peter, and Andrew, my brother, took our nets and went to the sea. Gospel of Peter, verse 14. So this is first person, so that's why they think it's the Gospel of Peter. But Peter can be speaking inside the Gospel of Matthew. For example, Simon Peter can be talking in the first person in this passage, and it doesn't mean it's the Gospel of Peter, just like it says here, didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house, Luke 2, verse 49. That's Jesus as a teen. We would call this Luke's Gospel, even though it's first person Jesus. So that's not how you make a decision, whether this is the Gospel of Peter or something else. All right, now I've prepared you to understand the Gospel of Peter is not necessarily the name of the book. It was part of the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. At least that's what some scholars say based on something Origen says. So let's say Peter has a gospel. Let's say he does have a separate gospel. And let's say he has the same content. This content is apparently from the Gospel of Matthew to the Hebrews, okay? It's called the Gospel according to the Hebrews. That's the name of Matthew's work. It came down repeatedly, was called that in numerous places. So let's read what Origen says about this relationship. Origen is a scholar from the 200s. This is, again, part of the article here. This is Ron Cameron relaying this information, and it's inside this article in Wikipedia. Origen makes mention of the Gospel of Peter as agreeing with the tradition of the Hebrews. The relationship to the Gospel according to the Hebrews, that's the Matthew work, became more clear when Theodoret states that the Nazarenes made use of the Gospel of Peter. See, so now if the Gospel of Peter has a portion that belongs in the Gospel of Matthew to the Hebrews, now you can start seeing these are just related texts. In other words, the Gospel of Peter is probably an extract out of the Gospel of Matthew called the Gospel to the Hebrews. For it is known, so Theodoret says, for it is known, the Gospel of Peter is known by the testimony of the fathers generally that the Nazarene Gospel was commonly called the Gospel according to the Hebrews. So there you go again. So you have this clear circle. The same gospel was in use among the Ebionites, and in fact, as almost all critics are agreed, the gospel according to the Hebrews, under various names, such as the gospel according to Peter, according to the apostles, the Nazarenes, Ebionites, Egyptians, was substantially the same work, circulated very widely throughout the early church, though with modifications. So what we're apparently learning here is that these are actually not two different works. Remember, these things don't really come with titles. You could call the same work Gospel of Peter if you wanted to. You could call it the Gospel of Matthew according to the Hebrews. So that's what's apparently going on. It's an interchangeable term. So now you understand why the Gospel of the Hebrew of Matthew to the Hebrews had to be destroyed. Also, the Gospel of Peter had to be destroyed. All we have is this small remnant here now. And there you have it. You have proof positive that the reason the Gospel of Matthew is gone, even though it was in the Sycamore of the Bishop of Constantinople, that's the Western Empire, by the way, not the Judean church. The Western Empire had preserved the Gospel of Hebrews until the 800s. So this is a huge point, my friends, and there's a huge reason why you can now see there's editing going on to our Bible. Anything that involves the Herods has to be softened. So what do we see now in the Gospels? We see it's just as Herod is Pilate sends him to Herod Antipas because it says he's in town, he's the ruler of Galilee, so this is his jurisdiction. So he hands him over, but you don't hear of any order coming back from Herod Antipas, do you? You just see the blood, the thorns on Jesus' head, and the men are mocking him and put a robe on him and sends him back to Pilate. Now, where's the order? What was he told to do? Well, it's not clearly stated in any of the Gospels, but here you get the clear reference that Herod the Antipas had to have been the one who ordered it because he was the one you had to apply to get the body to bury it. Okay, so you have to go back to the judicial officer who made the decision, get his authority. You don't go to Pilate, who didn't make the decision in the first place. Okay, so this is so important for us to know some history about our church. So now we all should remember in John 18, the Sanhedrin says we don't have power to kill, and they go to Pilate and says we can't do it, so please kill him. And so they don't actually kill Jesus. It's the Romans decide to do it for their own reasons because of the jealousy of King Herod from Galilee. He wants to kill Jesus because he's a rival king in the same jurisdiction, right? Now, who is Paul? Paul was raised with Herod the Tetrarch as a child. Okay, here it is. Now there was the church that was at Antioch, certain prophets and teachers, as Barnabas and Simeon, who was called Niger. This is Acts 13, verse 1, by the way. And Lucius was probably Luke of Cyrene, and Manaen, who had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch and Saul. There is no comma in Greek. There is no punctuation. So That's a simple fact. My name was brought up at Herod the Tetrarch and Saul. So he said, wait a minute. Why do we think Paul's a member of the Herodian family that close that he would be in this relationship? There are two important reasons. First of all, that Paul was a Roman citizen by birth, which is a very rare honor, okay? And it's only primarily given to those who rule the empire. That means that they cannot be arrested and put to death. They cannot be punished or whipped or in any way harmed. So this is basically an elite protection. That's why Paul, if you read the book of Acts, he's getting all this elite protection. Centurions, 2 centurions show up with 100 men each. 200 men escort him away from the place that the Jews of Asia were upset at Paul for allegedly bringing his friend Trophimus into the temple uncircumcised, defiling the temple. So he's getting this huge protection. He's going to be put under arrest to see if he had any responsibility for that event. And so that's when Paul says, I'm a Roman citizen. So in other words, he's saying, don't hurt me, don't beat me, don't do anything, because you have to protect me. And the reaction of that official was extraordinarily defensive, like, oh my gosh, let's get him under total guard, protection, 600 horsemen, take him all the way to Caesarea, far away from Jerusalem, to protect him. So how do we know Paul was a Roman citizen, and how do we know it was from birth? Because Paul says both things. First, he mentions in Acts 16:37, he says here, but Paul said to the officers, he's just recounting story and he's letting out something. They beat us publicly without a trial, even though we are Roman citizens. That's going to resonate immediately with this guard, this basically commander, police guard, if you want to call it in modern terms. And he says they threw us in prison. Well, that would be a violation of the right of a Roman citizen, okay? Then we learn in Acts 22:28 that Paul actually was born into Roman citizenship. And that's key, because that's what Roman officials and their children get. They get protection all the way down the line in the family. So when the commander hears about this, they're having a discussion, Acts 22:28. The commander, this guy who's nervous now because he's dealing with someone who claims to be a Roman citizen, and he says, I had to pay a lot of money for my citizenship. So he's wondering, hey, Paul, are you that rich you could buy your citizenship? And then Paul says, no, but I was born a citizen. Paul replied. That meant Paul was part of the elite political class, not just a regular guy. Now, with that preface, you'll figure it out when you read Romans 16:11. What is his connection? Paul writes, greet Herodion, my kinsman. In Greek, when I add the ion at the end, it means son of. Greet my kinsman, son of Herod. One of his friends was a son of Herod, and I've already shown you he was raised as a child with Herod the Tetrarch, Herod Antipas, the guy who sent Jesus to his death. In this clip, or this excerpt we found in the desert of Egypt in the 1890s. And let me just show you, some people don't know, doubt that ION has that meaning because it's not translated that way. It'll say, just they'll say that's his name, as if that's his name. His name is not Herodion. That's not a name. It's son of Herod. In ancient Greece, a patronymic indicating someone's father's name often used the suffix ion. Suffix means not prefix. It goes at the end, ion. It meant for sons or for daughters. For example, Demophon Cadmion would mean Demophon, son of Cadmos. Do you see what's hidden from you by telling you this name of the person was Herodion and not translating it? This is literally a crop from the Bible. It should say, greet Herod, it should say, greet son of Herod, my kinsman. What if you'd seen that? Because that's exactly what it's telling you down here. You should have translated, if it said Demophon Cadmion, you would not translate it, greet Cadmion, would you? You would translate it exactly as it says here. You translate Cadmion as son of Cadmos. You would translate Herodion as son of Herod. Greet my kinsman, the son of Herod. See, it's hidden from you. It's not an accident. You're never told what's going on. And he's related to a son of Herod. His Roman citizenship meant he was part of the political elite, the Herodian family, and he is a relative. All right, so to be technically complete here, Herod the Tetrarch, Herod Antipas, was ruler of Galilee and Perea, known for his involvement with John the Baptist and his questioning of Jesus. He had John the Baptist killed, so let's be sure we know he's a terror. And Jesus said in Mark, he said, beware the leaven of Herod. So this is not the family group we want to be associated with, and we're to beware the leaven of the Herod, not embrace one of them who's hiding out in our group, and we're not catching on who he really is because we don't understand Greek. Herodion, what is that, his name? Yes, that's what his name was. We're told that's not his name. His name is son of Herod, whoever that was. Now, there's three sons that are ruling, who are directly ruling in the Judea period in the 30s through 60s. However, Herod the Tetrarch, Herod Antipas, dies in about 39 AD. So the person who Paul is referring to here is that he calls Herodion, is the son of Herod, is a kinsman, but it's one of the other sons. So Herod the Antipas is dead in by Romans 16:11 because we're at 58 AD. So there's another Herod he's referring to. We don't know which one it is, but it's one of those three sons. And then a fourth ruler of the kingdom. So there's a tetrarchy, by the way, is what it's called, Herod the Tetrarch, right? So what does that mean? It means there's four rulers. And let me just make sure you see that, Herod the Tetrarch. See that? Herod the Tetrarch. That means he's one of the four rulers, okay? Arch means ruler, and tetra means four in Greek. So he is one of four. But the other three people never really called anything special, okay? But he was known for asserting that he's a king, king of Galilee, king of whatever. And the others were sort of more timid. But one of the four was also grandson. So we're not talking about four total children of Herod. There are three sons of Herod, but there's one who's a grandson, okay? All right, so now let's go a little bit backwards. Now, we know from John 18, the high priest doesn't have authority to kill anyone, but when Paul's in the mix, it changes. He has that authority because he's a Herodian family member. He can hold the power of King Herod of Galilee, that is Herod Antipas. Now, let's look at the person, the high priest at the time of Christ's crucifixion, the one who was involved also in presenting Jesus to Pilate. Yes, the Herodian family, USKI, yes, the Herodian family did influence the choice of Caiaphas as high priest. While Caiaphas was appointed by Valerius Gratus, the Roman prefect, his father-in-law Annas had previously been high priest and remained influential, according to multiple sources. The Herodian family who ruled Judea during this period also played a role in high priest appointments as they were appointed by Roman officials. So there you have it. You have the high priest is not really an independent authority. He's not really serving the Jewish people. He's serving his appointees, and the appointees of Rome from Rome came through the influence of the Herodian family. And that's why Caiaphas wants to kill Jesus. Why? If he wanted to see his death, it was because King Herod of Galilee, that's what it says in this excerpt we showed you from the what's called the Gospel of Peter, but it's a lot more likely, as Origen would point out, it was more likely the Gospel to the Hebrews by Matthew, which is originally in Hebrew. And so this is the first gospel, but all of this has to be erased so you don't see it. See, and that's what you're not understanding. That's why the Gospel of Hebrews had to be destroyed, because it would expose more of this tie-in that Rome was more to blame. And, we just have to hide and not remind you that Caiaphas is really pointed to the influence of the Herodian family. And as long as we can keep you in the dark about all this, we can keep blaming the Jews. And Paul did everything he could in Thessalonians to say that the Jews killed Christ and they're the enemies of all mankind. That is a Roman trope. That is a Roman desire that you would believe something that is not true. It was really the Herodian family manipulating even the high priest of Israel. The people of Israel, the Jewish people didn't seem to be opposed to him if you look at the big picture. And but this is what you got. You got the Caiaphas is the antagonist of Jesus because he's serving Herod, and most particularly the Herod the king, the one who calls himself king of Galilee, and that would be Herod Antipas, the childhood friend of guess who? Paul. And Luke lets you know this. That's just what's so interesting. And but I want you to see the date of his death. According to Josephus, Caiaphas was appointed in AD 18 by the Roman prefect Valerius Gratus, as we mentioned, under the influence of the Herodian family, who preceded Pontius Pilate. So that was the guy before Pilate was Valerius Gratus, and then the same office was taken by Pontius Pilate. Now, look at his death. Death is 36, 37 AD. Where is Paul's service to the high priest? It was in this time period that Caiaphas was still the high priest, because he's doing this immediately after the crucifixion. The time period is referenced in Acts 9, that basically this had been going on by Paul for many years, and this is what's going on. He's attacking and brutalizing and causing people to blaspheme and murdering Stephen and all these other things he's doing. He's doing it not because Caiaphas wants it, because rather Caiaphas's master, which is Herod the Tetrarch, Herod Antipas, he's still alive. He's going to be alive till 39 AD. Herod Antipas is killed approximately 39 AD. All right, let's continue. So if you go, here's the Blue Letter Bible. It's a chronology of Paul. It's called Chronology of Acts and the Epistles. So when you put Acts and the Epistles together, there's an important list of dates, and this is what you get. He has it, or it has, that the descent of the Holy Spirit comes on everybody in about 30 AD. Okay, so Paul is allegedly converted in 36 AD. So he's doing this all up to the date of Caiaphas' death. But somehow Caiaphas dies right about the time Paul's going to convert. I'll put that in air quotes because he's out of he's got to have a new mission. You know, the guy he's been reporting to is dead. And now he has this statement of what's happened on the road to Damascus, and also giving him a strange order to go over to Damascus, where the Caiaphas doesn't have any authority to do that. But guess who would? That would have been Herod Antipas, who could give him authority to go anywhere in the Roman Empire and brutalize people in Damascus if they wanted to. Let's continue. Now, I want to underscore the proof positive that Caiaphas is going after Jesus because of Herod Antipas, as we've seen in this Gospel of Peter fragment, what's called the Gospel of Peter fragment, that he's called King Herod, and he's the one who gave the order for Jesus' death, and therefore was the one who would be the person to go to get authority to take his body. So this is key, my friends. Now I want to show you actually the real word that is in this passage. It isn't brought up actually as the New King James is. It's a little more intimate than that. Manaen, who had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch and Saul, and that's Acts 13:1. What is the word for brought up there? It's sin trophos. Now, trophos is really a word for food and sin together. So taking nourishment together is really what this means. Now, what does it suggest? The very first meeting that Mr. Mountsey provides you is nursed with another. That's why people think of childhood. Well, we'll call him a childhood friend. Not just childhood friend, one intimately associated from the time you were a child due to the fact that you were commonly nursing or at least eating with the other person because your kinship, a family kinship. And then the NIV has one brought up with. But that does not mean that's the meaning. The meaning is what I just told you, who is nursed with. That's what it means, taking food together in a intimate childhood way. So this is not what you are told even in the NIV. I would suggest very much when you say they're kinsmen and you're syntrophos, we know the relationship that Paul has with Herodion, the son of Herod, the other son of Herod in Romans. That was definitely couldn't have been Herod Antipas anymore because he died in 39, but it still means he's related to all the other brothers, not just Herod Antipas. And that's how we know he's part of this family. Herod Antipas and some other son of Herod that was at Rome at the time he's writing to the epistle to the Romans. And he's nursed with them at birth, okay, or close to birth or within an approximate time period when they were still children. And that's what it means. And so this is why we have proof of what's going on with Paul. He was sent in on a mission to divide and conquer. Let me just give you a little lesson about that strategy in Roman politics. All right, now Rome was famous for infiltrating organizations, including religious organizations, in countries they want to conquer. And here's an article about divide and conquer approach. The Latin phrase divide et impera is as old as politics and war. The divide your enemy so you can reign approach is attributed to Julius Caesar. That's a long time before Jesus, by the way. He successfully applied it to conquer Gaul 22 centuries ago, but he wasn't the first nor the last to implement it. And this is even though it's a modern quote, it's interesting. Nicholas Machiavelli famously said, politics have no relations to moral. The Italian politician and diplomat believed that for a leader, it is better to be feared than to be loved. He relied upon the art of manipulation to build followers and allies. The term Machiavellian became a synonym for facts marked by cunning or bad faith. One who deceives will always find those who allow themselves to be deceived. Now, let me show you something. Paul defended pretending to be something you aren't, exactly what a secret agent would say. This is incredible. It's even in a work called that people believe and try to defend. This is from a Christian. Now, let's listen to what this says. But before I read it to you, I want you to keep in mind two things. One is Jesus talks about wolves, ravening wolves that come in sheep's clothing. He's talking about someone who's going to infiltrate, who bring false teachings, false prophecy. And this is a person you must be on guard against. Okay. So, and he also said, beware the leaven of the Pharisees as well as the leaven of Herod. Okay, we'll get into that in a minute. And so you have here, Mountsey provides a definition of the word for became here, because Paul's going to say, to the Jews I became like a Jew. To those under the law I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law. So he pretends to obey God's law in order to win people. But that means you're giving a false, cunning appearance of what you really are, but you're not. You're giving a false thing. In fact, it fits exactly what Jesus talked about, ravening wolves who come in sheep's clothing. And Mountsey tells you what this word ginomai means, or ginomai means to become or assume the character and appearance of anything. Wow, that fits Paul to a T. Let's just read this first part here. Though I am free to belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. So he's putting it on the justification that lying for the gospel is okay. He even says that in Romans 3:7. And by the way, some people add 5 extra words that are nowhere in the Bible to try to say, some say it's okay to lie for the gospel. No, that's not what it says. Paul definitely is saying, but if by my lie the glory of God is advanced, why am I still called a sinner? Romans 3:7. Look it up. Don't look it up in the NIV because they add 5 words that should never be there. But you can look at Mountsey's and see they're not there, and he's not going to lie and tell you they're there. So he gives you the true translation. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law. That means a false face, a chameleon. He's pretending to be what he isn't. Now, I just want you to see something. Paul is going to now, in Galatians 2, verse 11 to 14, say something. Now, this is understood to be a work he writes after what he just wrote in 1 Corinthians 9. Now, what he's going to accuse Peter of, you could also say Peter is just pretending to go along with what people believe until he sees there's meat sacrificed to idols and says, oh my gosh, I can't eat that food. I'm going to get up and not eat with them. So he'll go along with them to a certain extent, but then he has certain lines that can't be crossed. But anyway, but Paul is going to now say Peter is a hypocrite for doing this by pretending to be what he really isn't. The exact thing that Paul defends doing to win the gospel for his view. But Peter can't do anything to win the gospel for the true view of Jesus. Now listen to this. Just pay attention to the hypocrisy of Paul to even attack someone as a hypocrite for the very thing he just defended in 1 Corinthians 9. Galatians 2:11-14, New King James. Now when Peter had come to Antioch, I withstood him to his face, because he was to be blamed. For before certain men came from James, he would eat with the Gentiles. But when they came, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing those who were of the circumcision. So he was worried that other people would think he was doing wrong, right? So what does he do? He's going to withdraw. What does Paul do? He pretends to be what he isn't. So if Peter did this for a hypocritical reason, it's no different than what Paul was doing, right? Peter was pretending to go along with lawlessness, okay? Now, I don't believe this is what's really going on. This is Paul's version of the facts, okay? So you have to take it with a grain of salt. And the rest of the Jews also played the hypocrite with him. Oh my gosh. So all of you who tell me to listen to 2 Peter, should I now conclude that Peter is a hypocrite and will say things he doesn't believe, and so he doesn't really believe anything he says in 2 Peter? I mean, it just does show you, if you follow Paul down the road, you can't even believe anything that Peter or the apostles teach, because Paul is so superior to them. He can call out the one that Jesus said, I'm going to build my church on this rock, Petra. Peter is actually a hypocrite, a liar, a deceiver, a scandalous person who nobody should pay attention to. So that even Barnabas was carried away with their hypocrisy. Can I get you to look at this, my friends? Just one more time. To the Jews, I became like a Jew. I assumed the character and appearance of a Jew. I became like one of the law, though I myself am not under the law. He is declared, even a Jewish person is no longer subject to the law. I hope you guys get that. The law is gone, not just for Gentiles, but all Jews. This is a total eradication of the Jewish religion. And now I'm going to take you to one more thing to show you that it's a seal the deal kind of thing, that you know he's not from God. He's not from Jesus. He's totally in the bank for the Herodians. And I'm going to read you Romans 13, and that'll seal the deal, and you'll get it. Now, please be aware, for all the years that Paul is living in, even when he grew up in Cilicia, it was in a Roman part of the Roman Empire, although they spoke Greek there. When he's in Judea and he's with the apostles, he's in the Roman Empire. He's not subject to any other jurisdiction. Okay, so now when he tells you the following, and he's telling the Roman people, you've got to do this. You've got to treat the governing authorities in a certain way. I'm going to read this to you. He's talking about the Roman Empire because these people live in Rome, and he's going to tell them how they have to behave. Now listen to this. Now he tells you the law is dead and gone, and he says this was given by angels to Moses, mediator, in Galatians 3:19, and then he goes on to say there are no gods, and then he goes on to say they're weak and beggarly elemental angels who control the element, and he's going to say, why do you want to be bondaged anymore to these people? So that law was a tutor, it's dead and gone. But there, even though that written law was given by God, the law given by men is superior, is the one you have to follow. Listen to this. Talk about hypocrisy on a strange level. Romans 13:3, verse 1. Every person must be subject to the governing authorities. Those that presently exist have been instituted by God, Theos. Therefore, whoever resists authority, the exousia, resists what God has decreed. And those who resist will bring judgment, krima, we're talking about damnation, on themselves. Now he's going to repeat this over and over again. So I have to read it more so you can see he's not waffling at all. He's not going to make exceptions. He's going to keep emphasizing the same point. For rulers are not a source of fear for those who do good. Tell this to Jesus. But for those who do wrong. Would you have no fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will receive approval from him. For he is a servant of God. You're telling me that Caesar, Augustus, and Caligula, and these wonderful men, the Neros of the world in the future, they're all from God. That's what he's saying. For he is a servant of God for your good. Tell that to Jesus. But if you do what is wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain, for he is a servant of God. Is he not doubling down on what sounds crazy? Yes, an avenger to carry out wrath on the one who does wrong. Wow. So here Paul says damnation will be suffered if you resist the governing authorities. Please note this passage supports Professor Eisenman's evidence that Paul was of the Herodian party, which I've reviewed here with you today, before and after Damascus, a secret agent who wormed his way into Christianity. And that's what Jesus was talking about. And I'll close with just one more verse for you to consider. All right. So what would you expect Jesus means by this? Jesus speaks of a wolf in sheep's clothing in Matthew 7, verse 15 in the Sermon on the Mount. In this passage, Jesus warns his followers, quote, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. Now, we all know Paul admits that he's a Benjamite. He's a member of the Benjamin tribe. And guess what? There's a prophecy that uses the very word, ravening wolves, shall raven. Benjamin is a wolf that ravens. This is in Genesis 49:27. So Jesus actually is alluding to another passage. The word ravenous wolves only appears in 3 places in Scripture, and that includes Genesis 49:27, Matthew 7:15, and one passage in Ezekiel, which is talking about those people who tell you not to obey the food laws, not to obey certain laws of the Torah. They're ravening wolves. And so it fits in line with this as well. But you could just see the tight focus here. Jesus is definitely calling to mind this passage by using the term even inwardly, inside, what they really are, not what they're showing you on the outside. They're really inwardly a wolf. Out on the outside, they look like a sheep. See this picture on to the right. Outwardly, they have a mask of a sheep. They look like a sheep. They talk like a sheep, but they're not really a sheep. They became ginomai. They pretend. They put on a false appearance of who they really are, and they're not a sheep. They're a wolf. And he refers to them by the ravenous wolves. And then let's look at Genesis 49:27 completely. Benjamin is a wolf that ravens. In the morning he shall devour the prey. What did Paul do in the first part of his career? He killed us. He destroyed us. He made us his prey. And at the evening, what did he do in the second half of his career? He shall divide the church. Oh, he divide the spoils. So what he's trying to do is gain control of the church and divide it in two, which is what he's actually, it looks like he has been successful on, because a lot of Christians are not paying attention. This is a test from God. Paul is a test from God. Can you read these passages and then therefore know you need to reject him? If you can do that, then you have passed the test. If you do not do that, you will not pass the test. And you will not get the sign that you can go past go. That's where you want to go, right? You want to go be with God forever. You want to be with Jesus forever. Well, then you better look at this verse and you better study this passage very carefully, because your fate, your eternal fate, may depend upon who you're listening to. Are you listening to the ravening wolf, who's a Benjamite, who's killed in the morning and divided us up as a church? And some went the right way, and some, a large part turns out, went the wrong way. Well, Jesus said in Matthew 6 that very few will find the true path. He said the few, the easy way is broad, and the narrow way is difficult and few will find it. So it's not going to be a lot of people. He's not predicting he's going to have a massive, overwhelming conversion of people. No, he's going to have a very few people who will be following him. That's his prophecy. You got to get in on what he's talking about, not what Paul's talking about, and find your path through Christ. Ciao, and God bless.